3 weeks after the arrest, I sat in my apartment with the case files spread across the table. Both of them. Megan Collins and Emma Hartley. 20 years apart, finally connected. We'd gotten Aberdeen on the surveillance charges. The conspiracy case was building. His lawyers were fighting every step, but the evidence was solid: the backdoor, the access logs, the pattern of watching and controlling and eliminating threats. But murder was different. Murder required proof beyond reasonable doubt, and for murder, we had almost nothing. I pulled out the crime scene photos. Megan first, then Emma. The wounds were similar. Multiple stab wounds to the torso, delivered with force and precision. No defensive wounds on either victim; they hadn't seen it coming, or they'd known their attacker well enough not to fight. The medical examiner's notes described the blade pattern. A serrated knife, 6 inches long, consistent with common hunting knives. The kind you could buy at any hardware store. The kind Aberdeen probably never touched. I'd been thinking about what he'd said in the parking lot. The way he'd neither confirmed nor denied the killings. The way he'd talked about systems and control and patterns. Pierre Aberdeen was a builder, a watcher, a man who operated from behind screens and through proxies. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a stabber. I pulled Danny Vance's interview transcript. Asterisk, there's this one guy. He started coming around about 6 months ago. Asterisk, Aberdeen had used Danny as a distribution point for stolen electronics. He'd connected Danny to Megan. He'd built the relationship that would later become the frame, but he'd also built other relationships. Asterisk, Danny's got friends, rough people. Asterisk, that's what Tommy Whitmore had said. Danny's friends, the Harbor Network. The people Aberdeen had known since childhood. I thought about Mrs. Vance in the care home. Asterisk, Charlie's boys, they were trouble. Asterisk, Aberdeen had grown up running with the Vance family. He'd escaped the slums, built himself into something respectable, but he'd never fully severed those connections. He'd used them when he needed things done, things he couldn't do himself, things like murder. I pulled up the case timeline again. Megan Collins, murdered on a Tuesday night, body found Wednesday morning. Aberdeen's access logs showed he'd been at home, using his personal computer. Alibi confirmed. Emma Hartley, murdered on a Friday night 20 years ago. Aberdeen had been at a company event on the mainland, dozens of witnesses. Both times, he'd made sure he was somewhere else, somewhere visible, somewhere with an alibi, because someone else had held the knife. I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Aberdeen had ordered the killings. That much I was certain of. He'd identified the threats, tracked the targets, and set the operations in motion. But he'd outsourced the violence. To who? The harbor contacts were the obvious answer. The rough men from his childhood, the ones who lived in the shadows and did things for money. But the investigation into his finances hadn't found any significant payments to individuals, only the small amounts he'd used to fund Danny's electronics operation. If he was paying a killer, he was hiding it well. Or maybe payment wasn't the mechanism at all. Aberdeen had spent 20 years watching people, collecting secrets, building leverage over anyone who might be useful. What if the killer wasn't being paid? What if they were being controlled? I pulled out the list of names Nathan had found in the surveillance logs. The people Aberdeen had tracked obsessively over the years. Business owners, politicians, ordinary citizens. Hundreds of searches, thousands of hours of surveillance. Somewhere in that list was someone who owed Aberdeen enough to kill for him, someone who was still out there. The next morning, I went to Burke's desk. We need to keep digging. He looked up from his paperwork. Into what? The actual killer. Aberdeen gave the orders, but someone else did the work. I handed him a copy of the surveillance log names. One of these people is connected. Someone he watched, someone he controlled, someone who did his dirty work. Burke studied the list. His face was troubled. This is hundreds of names. I know, it could take years to investigate all of them. I know that too, and even then we might not find anything. I sat down across from him. Burke, there's a person on this island who stabbed 2 women to death. They're walking around right now, going about their life, thinking they got away with it. I leaned forward. Aberdeen's in custody, but his weapon is still free, and as long as that's true, it's not over. Burke was quiet for a long moment. You're not going to let this go, he said, not a question. No. He looked at the list again, at the names, the dates, the scope of what we were facing. Then he nodded. All right, he said. Where do we start? That night, I stood at my window and looked out at the harbor. The fog was rolling in, as it always did. The lights of the fishing boats blinked in the distance. Somewhere out there, the cameras were watching, recording, feeding data into systems that would take years to fully clean. And somewhere on this island, maybe watching me right now, was a killer. Aberdeen had ordered the deaths, but someone else had held the knife. Someone who knew how to kill quietly. Someone who'd done it twice and never been caught. Someone who was waiting to see what I'd do next. I closed the blinds and turned back to my files. It wasn't over. Not even close.